Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
What are words worth?
Without words, no ideas.
You don't have a word for a concept, then you have to describe the concept. You have to know what you're talking about.
When ideas fail, words come in very handy.
When we have the word, we can say, refer not just to the concept, but to the concept as we approve of it.
Words in papers, words in books, words on TV, words for crooks, words of comfort, words of peace, words to make the fighting cease.
How many words for snow do the Eskimos have anyway?
Our guest is linguist, author, and NPR commentator Geoff Nunberg.
If we only use the words that have official standing in literature and dictionaries and so on, it would be a poor vehicle for communicating a lot of things.
What are words worth?
Recorded in front of a live audience at the Marsh Theater in San Francisco.
Coming up on Philosophy Talk, after the news. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Today, we've taken Philosophy Talk just down the road. We're recording the program in front of a live audience at the Marsh Theater, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance.
No breeding while we talk, please. Our thinking originates at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
So we're happy to meet in person some of our listeners right here in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, folks. Our topic today, what are words worth?
Well, Ken, I think words are worth a whole lot. Right now, I'm thinking that you are a bit of an ilunga.
A what?
An ilunga. That's a word I've just imported into English from Shaluba. A bunch of linguists voted it the world's hardest word to translate.
And now you're calling me an ilunga? So come on, what are you calling me? What does that mean?
Ilunga means a person who's ready to forgive any abuse the first time it happens, and they'll even overlook it the second time it happens, but they'll go ape the third time it happens. I just think it's a wonderful little word. I've been using it to think ever since I heard about it. I wonder if Obama is basically an ilunga, and he's going to get mad one of these days. My wife, on the other hand, is not an ilunga. She gets mad the first abuse.
Well, John, you can call me an ilunga once, or maybe twice, but don't try it a third time. But seriously, John, do you think you couldn't have had that thought until you had the word ilunga?
Well, I don't know about you, Ken, but I do virtually all of my thinking in words. If I don't have the words, I can't have the thoughts. And if you don't have thoughts, you can't act on the thoughts. You can't plan. So the words are really very important. For example, tonight I'm planning to do a little skoogling.
Skoogling? Is skoogling really something you can do on the public radio airwaves? I mean, sounds like a behind closed doors kind of activity to me.
No, not at all. Skoogling is Googling the names of old schoolmates. It's a new word, and skoogling is increasingly the cause of silences.
Silences? You mean like silences silences?
Oh, no, Ken, you're so retro. No, silences, Cylences, long gaps in a phone conversation that occur when a person is reading an email or cyber shopping while talking on the phone, or skoogling.
You know, John, you're really starting to get on my nerves with this.
Don't be such an ilunga, Ken. But let me answer your question. I think there are lots of thoughts we can't have without having the right words, or at least we wouldn't be very likely to have the thoughts. Different languages and cultures have different words, and hence different conceptual schemes, and they even perceive the world differently.
Yeah, I think there's less truth to this than you think, John. I mean, you just translated the word linguists found most difficult to translate, ilunga, with an English phrase about, 10 words long. I mean, before you ever had the word, you could have thought, Ken is the sort of person who is ready to forgive an abuse for the first time, to tolerate it the second time, but never a third time. I mean, isn't that the very same thought you now have with your fancy word ilunga when you think Ken is an ilunga? So what's the big deal? I mean, I could invent a word, lexijerk, to mean radio personality who shows off by using new words in a pointless way. And now I can think, John is a lexijerk. But it's the same thought I've been having for the last 5 minutes or so.
Well, good points, Ken, I must admit. But I think you're missing something. When a culture or a language finds a word useful, it suggests that the phenomena that the word stands for has some importance. It gets it a distinction, a grouping worth making. The word Ilunga encodes the insight or the possible insight that people that take 3 offenses to get truly angry form an interesting class. And maybe they have other interesting common characteristics too.
Yeah, maybe. But, I'm told that the French don't have a general word for berry. They just have words for strawberries and raspberries and blueberries, but not the general word. But you know what? They still recognize the class. I mean, they even serve a nice compote made only of berries.
Well, Ken, I think in order to appreciate the depth of my point of view, I'm going to need some help. Luckily, we have a thoughtful linguist to help us think about these things. One of the best in the world, but he's right from the Bay Area, and I actually stole all my examples from him. That's Geoff Nunberg.
Geoff is the author of the book, The Years of Talking Dangerously. He'll join us shortly, and we'll also be hearing from members of our live audience as they join this discussion too.
But first, our roving philosophical reporter, Rena Palta, talks to someone who actually earns his living inventing words. She files this report.
You set up a premise, you promote the premise, and then you pay it off.
Mark Hershon understands the power of words. A couple evenings a week, he runs a comedy improv team in downtown San Francisco.
We started back in February, and we needed a name. So I said, well, why don't we call it the Free Range Improv School and Company, which, if you boil that down to an acronym, spells Frisco.
Now, people in the Bay Area hate the word Frisco, and that's largely because of one man.
Herb Cain, curse his soul. In 1953, this San Francisco Chronicle columnist wrote a book called Don't Call It Frisco and started this one-man campaign to not call it Frisco. Now, Frisco dates back to the days of the Barbary Coast and the Gold Rush. There's no reason not to call it Frisco, but he started this thing that maligned anybody who called it Frisco.
Nowadays, using that single word can peg you as a tourist or completely out of the loop. Or Hershon's hoping maybe it can draw a crowd to a comedy event.
Does the name have power? And I think it does.
Hershon thinks a lot about names because he creates them for a living. In his day job, Hershon's a branding consultant. And when he worked at Lexicon Branding, he helped name the Pentium processor and Dasani water. He also named a small item that turned out to be one of the most famous brands in the world.
The BlackBerry phone.
Nowadays, we all know what a BlackBerry is. But when the company that makes the BlackBerry brought it to Hershon and his colleagues, no one had seen anything like it.
It looked like a black plastic pager, and they somehow crammed this incredibly tiny keyboard with these little black rounded plastic buttons. And so we're passing these models around the table and making observations about the device and how it works. And I make the observation that it looks kind of like a high-tech BlackBerry, like the fruit.
The smartphone's marketing manager was from an area of Canada where blackberries don't grow, so he was intrigued by the name.
We did another 8 weeks of work and generated probably 5,000 names. And after all the legal and all of the focus groups, they probably had a dozen or so names that were legally available and clear to use. And at the end of all of this, the CEO, who was not part of the original briefing, but he goes, you know what, I still like that BlackBerry name the best. So it's this one observation, literally 20 minutes into the meeting, that later on, today it's probably the most ubiquitous name in high technology right now.
Literally, words are worth a lot. Companies spend upwards of $100,000 just for the name of a big product like the BlackBerry. Considering how mysterious a name's success is, the whole idea of a career centered around making brand names may seem a little absurd. But for every genius success story like Starbucks, Google, and Kodak, there's a, Ford Edsel.
In terms of performance, it was actually a really good car, but it had a really stupid name. It was named for one of Henry Ford's kids. People just didn't get it. It was a total disconnect. They go, what does this mean? And they could never get over it. So a name can mean a lot. And you'll find a lot of times companies that go into bankruptcy, one of the few assets they can actually leverage is the brand names that they own. They may not be able to produce that anymore, but they can sell it to a cookie company that can make that cookie or whatever it was that went out of business.
But of course, a single word can only go so far.
I always say that a good name can really elevate a great product. A great name can really elevate a good product, but no name can save a bad product.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Rena Palta.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the Marsh Theater in San Francisco. I'm John Perry, And here is Ken Taylor.
And we're joined now by Geoff Nunberg. He's professor of linguistics at UC Berkeley School of Information. He's a regular contributor to NPR and the New York Times, and he's author, most recently, of The Years of Talking Dangerously. Geoff, welcome back to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks very much. It's always a pleasure, particularly when you come to my own zip code.
Geoff, we've known each other for a long time, and you always have seemed like a relatively normal human being.
I work hard at that.
But in spite of that, you became a linguist, and you're obsessed with words. I love listening to you on Fresh Air and other places, but tell me, how did a normal person like you get so obsessed with words?
I don't know. I think there are two kinds of linguists. They're the ones who are obsessed with words all the way along, and they're the ones who go to MIT intending to be math majors and get a C in topology. And most of the major figures in the field have had that experience.
I see. So tell us about words. How many new words come into English each year? How many words go out of English? And where do they come from?
Well, it's very hard to say how many words come into English because it's very hard to say what English is. Take all these brand names like BlackBerry. People say, "Oh, that's not a word. That's a proper noun." But of course, it is a word. It's a noun we use just as we do mobile phone or something like that. What's interesting is that the words come from a lot of different places. They come from branding experts. They trickle down from the media. A lot of words do that. They come in from technology. Look at all these words. We've got tweet and Twitter and tweezers, what I'm calling myself. It's an old guy who uses that. And then there are these words that just come out of nowhere. It's not clear why they come. They just reflect some shift in sensibility. Snarky, for example. I mean, we've been being nasty to each other for many millennia. People have been doing that. And all of a sudden we said, it was actually an Old English word, we need to borrow this word from British English to describe this particular take on being nasty.
But there's at least two different kinds of things. So a corporation with a product sets out to make up a word. Snarky, I don't know that anybody ever set out to make up a word to mean that. I mean, philosophers coin words all the time. How much of the new word coinage is intentional because somebody wants to name a product or wants to make an argument and they think they need a new term, and how much of it is just through the kind of everyday give and take in language?
Well, both processes happen. Sometimes the type of word tells you where it's come from. There's a kind of word that's formed from two different words, like a portmanteau word. Linguists call it like jazzercise or exercycle or things like that. Those are always invented by advertisers in the media, and there are gazillions of them around, and a sign of just how influential the media are. On the other hand, there are these words or new uses of words that just percolate up out of nowhere. One day in 1987, every adolescent girl in America woke up and said, "as if."
Right.
Just caught on.
And one of my favorite words is dis. I mean, I guess that's a shortening of disrespect or something. But it's a great word. And does anybody know who first used it that way? I mean,
it probably came out of black speech or inner city speech and worked its way into slang. A lot of slang comes from that community. Worked its way into adolescent slang and just spread.
Some people, like, when a word has that kind of root, think it's somehow illegitimate, right? Because that's the language of, like, those people, I mean, and there are these language mavens who want to be the guardians of everything. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, speaking as somebody associated with a dictionary, we're always getting calls and letters from people. Why are you putting this word in the dictionary? So, well, the dictionary's there to record the language. If we only use the words that have official standing in literature and dictionaries and so on, it would be a poor vehicle for communicating a lot of things like this.
So as a professor, I love telling my students the difference between infer and imply and being nauseous and being nauseated. They go around saying, "I'm nauseous," and I say, you're telling us that you're the kind of thing that makes people throw up. Do you really want to say that? But you're skeptical about all this. You just think, well, let the words have a life of their own.
Well, I think there's something to be said for fighting those rear guard battles, not about nauseous and nauseated, which you should have given up on long ago. But for example, enormity, I still use the word to refer to things that are not just large in size, but horrible or monstrous. When somebody talks about the enormity of Joe DiMaggio's contribution to baseball, I wouldn't even say that about George Steinbrenner, So I still fight the fight on that word, but I recognize that over a period of time, the word is likely to just change its meaning, and people like me are going to die out, and then that's what it'll mean.
This is a special edition of Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the Marsh Theater in San Francisco. We're asking, what are words worth, with Geoff Nunberg, author of The Years of Talking Dangerously.
In our next segment, we're going to examine which comes first, words or the concepts we use them to express. Do differences among language really point to significant differences in thought, culture, and conceptual scheme?
Words, concepts, and cultures, along with questions from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
Your words, but don't go hungry. Words have always nearly hung me.
Can words make us think things we've never thought before? We're asking what words are worth on Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is linguist Geoff Nunberg, author of The Years of Talking Dangerously.
Jeff, linguists like Benjamin Whorf used to tell us that words shape thought and culture in very deep ways. They even shape the way the world is perceived by people in different cultures. The Eskimos, we were told, had no general concept of snow because they have no general word for snow. The Hopis don't see time the way we do. Do contemporary linguists find this linguistic determinism view very plausible?
Well, it's a very popular view, but for a long time, linguists and philosophers, as you know, found it not a very plausible view. The idea was that thinking takes place in this pre-linguistic language, to like the language of thought or mentalese, and learning a language is just a business of packaging those little atoms of thought into different concepts. You really didn't need the word. As Ken was saying, you can understand foreign words without even having a word for them. So, for example, the Germans have this great word, schadenfreude,
Right.
which is the pleasure you take at somebody else's misfortune. Now, if I'm a Giants fan and the Giants lose the pennant and the Dodgers go on to the series and lose 4 straight, I could say, gee, I'd like to take pleasure in that. If only I spoke German, I could have that. I could have that
But
thought.
there's got to be something to the thought. Because just take a single language over time, or take scientific inquiry over time. The Greeks had no word for quark, or gluon, or I don't know, all these complicated scientific terms. So maybe their language had a bunch of descriptions that could have been compiled into, but it would have never occurred to them to do it. So there's got to be something to the thought that not every language at every time encodes every possible thinkable human concept, right?
Well, that's surely true. And although it may be that although you can have a thought, having the word adds something else. So the word originality in the sense of something novel or invented, that was really only invented in the 18th century. But a century earlier, Milton could write about Paradise Lost that he wanted to make things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. Now, he surely had the notion of originality. At the same time, when the word came in, something else must have happened, that it was a concept that people wanted to talk about, that they wanted to be able to think critically about. So having a word in your language clearly contributes something.
Sometimes there does seem to be a vacuum there, and somebody coins a word and it comes to fill that vacuum, even if that's not what the guy had in mind. In philosophy, we coined the term self-conscious a couple centuries ago to mean consciousness of the self. But it almost immediately came to mean being nervous because you think everybody's looking at you. So people must have needed that concept.
I want to go more slowly over your point about Milton, though. So he says in some poem he wants to do things that have never not been done or something, or some right. And that's like we would say he was wanting to be original. He had the goal of being original. Of course, he didn't have that word, right? Okay. Did people go around talking, like using that description, that phrase, to say, do what Milton does, do things that have never been done before? I mean, that's a different way of talking than be original. Yeah, I don't know if you get what I mean.
And it also invests the concept with a certain evaluation. It's an appraisive word, as you philosophers like to say, so that originality is a good thing, and we all agree that it's a good thing. You take a word like lifestyle. Lifestyle actually goes back to the 1920s. Alfred Adler, the psychologist, coined it, and it sort of had this little life in psychology. And all of a sudden, about 1968, 1969, Charles Reich writes a book called The Greening of America. Everybody says, ooh, I got to have a lifestyle, and it becomes the thing you have to have. Lifestyle and the pursuit of happiness were the two goals of American life. That signals some change in American attitude. Not as if we didn't have the material to have that thought, but once we get the word, it becomes a first-class citizen of our collective conversation.
I mean, in a way, what's important about words may not be that they allow us to think new things, but more pedestrian things. If you have a word for something, you can invent a phrase like "be original." If you have a word for something, it can start appearing in contracts. So Oxford University Press is paying Geoff Nunberg for an original work on this, that, and the other thing. So words, I mean, they are objects and they enter into text, and people have emotions about them, and all that in a way isn't possible just when they're just concepts out there.
And if you have you don't have a word for a concept, then you have to describe the concept. You have to know what you're talking about. And one of the advantages of having words, you don't have to know what you're talking about. We have a word, the public option, everybody's talking about all of a sudden. And nobody has a clear idea of what that is, but we can use the word and talk about it as if we knew what we were saying.
Well, Ken mentioned quarks and a number of other things that I can't think the thoughts any more than the Greeks could, but I can use the words.
I remember, I think it was an example of yours, carbon trading, right? Is that yours?
Carbon neutral.
Carbon neutral,
yeah.
That was an example of yours. Was that an example of yours?
Yeah.
Well, explain that example.
Well, you have this complicated thought. I don't know how to describe balancing the CO2 input and output and planting tree, whatever you do, and so on. You could sort of use this description every time you wanted to express that. Instead, you have this word carbon neutral. You can just say carbon neutral. It makes it easier to refer to. And as I say, it also makes it easier to refer to even if you don't know what it means.
Right. Because I can, as it were, defer to the authority of others. There's somebody out there who knows what it means. And I say, I intend to use carbon neutral the way that it's used around here.
How would we ever talk to the people who are fixing our computers or the contractors or so on if we had to know all these concepts? We just use the words.
But I want to. But you don't think that's thinking new thoughts? What is it then? Making it more efficient, making it easier? I mean, how would you describe that? The Sapir-Whorf would say, with the word carbon neutral, I can now think thoughts that were not previously unavailable to me. But you don't want to say that. But what is it that you want to say?
Well, in a certain sense, you could think of it as thinking new thoughts. When you have a word snarky, you carve up the realm of being nasty or impertinent to other people in a particular way, and that allows you to communicate that very particular take on what it is to be nasty in a way that you couldn't before. You could have had a long description, but I don't know if we would have agreed on what snarky was before we had the word snarky. You're
listening to Philosophy Talk. We're live at the Marsh, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performances. We're talking with linguist Geoff Nunberg about what words are worth, and we have lots of questions from our live audience, starting over here. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir. Tell us who you are and what your question is.
My name is John, and I thank you for being here. I first have a comment and then a question. Some years ago, my brother was in Zaire and came back. He had learned the language of Chaluba, so I appreciated your word in Chaluba.
Yes, well, and I seldom get a chance to use my Chaluba. So
well, I'll give you another word that he called me, and he said, "I'm a muntu a china many, 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 many," and that means you worthless person. And the more many, many, minis, the more worthless one is.
What a great language!
It's a fascinating language. Yeah. My question is, I think philosophy is really, the importance is the ability to formulate and develop questions. I had heard a philosopher say that. And do you think maybe the philosophy department is the most important department on the campus nowadays? And is it possible that maybe philosophers could be consultants to other departments who are trying to develop their questions, or has the language been so specialized that it's difficult to do that anymore?
I would like to institute a thing called philosophy futures, right? So that when a philosopher had an idea that in a century or two would result in computers or democracies, or like Aristotle, who thought up the notion of a thing, that's very important, right? That there would be some way to invest in that idea, and the philosopher could get some immediate income and so forth and so on. So potentially, it's a very important department. Actually, budgetary-wise, enrollment-wise, salary of the people who do it wise, its importance is not incredibly visible.
Thanks for the question. We're going to take some more questions. We're going to alternate between this side of the room and that side.
My name is Monique, and my husband thinks I'm a language snob. And I'm torn between accepting misuse over time as old language is in flux, because in the Webster Dictionary, biweekly means both twice a week and fortnightly. It also means every 2 weeks, which to me is inane and absurd. Exactly. On the other hand, I have used enormous to mean ginormous, and I've used that word. And I don't know at what point you decide that momentarily no longer means for a moment, but it means in a moment. Presently doesn't mean at present. It means, in a moment. And I'm torn as to where the line is.
I'm with you. The whole thing's very bewildering. I'll ask Geoff. I mean, we used to say enormous, and now people say humongous. What happened to enormous? What was wrong with it?
Well, we've still got enormous and ginormous and humongous. We've enriched our vocabulary for being impressed by how big things are.
But is there something, is there something deep in this impulse, to guard the language and freeze it, rather than to let it... It still bothers me that loan has become a verb. Right, I have to admit I can't use it that way. But is there something deep about this?
You mean like loan you money?
Yeah.
That wasn't always a verb.
Is there something deep here? Is it just social? Is it just sociology?
Well, no. In every culture, it seems some people have these attitudes. They don't. The language is going to hell in a handcar. You people have been saying that in English since the 17th century. Every generation. Now, they couldn't all be right, or we'd be grunting like bears today. But there is this urge to correct and this urge to hang on to distinctions that you think are being lost. I have it, and I think even most linguists who say it's all nonsense have it secretly.
Let me suggest a hypothesis about what may be at stake. So when we were talking about the significance of having a word rather than a phrase, you kind of said there's a kind of social significance to having a word, because now it's like what was a phrase which wasn't socially marked as special is now a word that is socially marked as special. Maybe the impulse to let's say freeze the language is an impulse to protect these social formations that you're comfortable with, right? Because you might think, well, low-class, uneducated people use loan as a verb. At least they once did, right? But now, if it's taking over, that's reforming the whole social thing. Their ways are now becoming acceptable. So it's kind of social conflict stuff.
That's one part of this. Certainly, is the idea that these new words reflect new groups that aren't respectful of the old ways. The other is that you genuinely do lose a concept when you lose a word. A lot of people, today's New York Times, use disinterest to mean lack of interest. And a lot of people, I think all three of us probably, and many of the people in the audience, find that a little disturbing. If you don't use disinterested to mean impartial, right. You've lost a concept. And I sort of think that's true.
Wait a minute. If you think you can have concepts without having words, why, when you lose a word, does it follow that you lose a concept? I mean, isn't it there?
But you can certainly individually have the concept, but having the word not only crystallizes the concept, but as I say, attaches a certain valuation to it. This is a good thing to be disinterested. And when we have the word, we can trot out that word and say, refer not just to the concept, but to the concept as we approve of it.
Right. So we've got more questions from our live audience. So welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Hi, I'm George. I have a question about the function of ambiguity in language. I had a professor last quarter mentioned to me that he thought that there was a dichotomy between what the speaker wants in a language and what the listener wants, because the speaker wants basically infinite ambiguity where he can say whatever he wants and everyone can be expected to know what he's saying, whereas the listener wants one single meaning for whatever sentence or word that he's receiving. I don't actually know if I agree with that or not, but I just would like to...
Was this a literature professor,
It was actually Eric Roberts. It was a CS professor, Eric Roberts. But anyway.
Jeff, you got any thought about that?
Well, yeah, no, it's clearly the listeners want things made clear for them. Speakers don't want to have to do any more work than they have to. What always interests me is how tolerant we are of ambiguity, even without realizing it. The expression "on the up and up," I always thought meant honest. His business is on the up and up. Turns out that a lot of people think it means his business is improving. And I did a radio piece on this, and I mentioned this, and I got a letter from somebody in Los Angeles that says, when you did that piece, my wife and I were talking about this, and we realized that we've both been using this expression in different ways. We've been married for 30 years, and we met in high school. And nobody had cotton to the idea they were talking
And
about.
you've been
different
talking past each other. You had been
Deborah
talking back-
Tannen, call your office.
Yeah, I mean, a guy gets back from Saudi Arabia, has a glass of Budweiser, and says, "I forgot how good beer tastes." And people think he's a complete slob because he thinks Budweiser is good beer, and for the rest of his life, ambiguity can be very dangerous.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about what words are worth with linguist Geoff Nunberg in front of a live audience at the Marsh, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance. And we've got more questions from that live audience on this side of the room. Welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Hi,
Yes.
my name is Linda, and I'm wondering about the word iconic, how it came to take over the way it has, and what was the concept or the phrase or word that we used before we had iconic?
I don't know. That's a Jeff question.
Yes.
But there is a philosopher in the woodpile here, Charles Sanders Peirce, who had index, icon, and symbol, and I'll let you explain what that
And
was
in
all
fact,
about.
iconic seems to have taken the place of symbolic in a lot of conversations. So people somehow seem to need new words for it's a metaphor for this or something. That's an expression that's been around for a long time, but it caught on in the language in the same way that we need new words for heroes and stars. There was a time when to say somebody was a legend mean nobody really knew if he existed or not. Now it means he's a great hero.
I want to ask you another thing about linguistic variation. We've talked about different languages having words, and I guess it's an urban myth long exploded that the Eskimos have all these different words for snow, right? But I mean, there are other kinds of differences between languages. So they could do, I guess Spanish and English have different, what's called aspect systems, right? Because you don't distinguish between the progressive and the simple present in Spanish. I mean, do those kind of differences make a difference in the way, language users?
They seem to. The psycholinguist Dan Slobin over at Berkeley talks about this idea of thinking for speaking. The idea being that you're going to have the thoughts that it's easiest for you to express. So in English, for example, we have a lot of verbs of manner that we can also use as verbs of directed motion. What does that mean? We can say things like, she danced down the stairs. He waltzed into the room, using a verb that says how the action was performed. At the same time, we say what direction it was performed in. You can't do that in the Romance languages. You just can't do it. And it turns out that when you can say things like he went down the stairs dancing or something, but they don't say it. And if you look at novels in French and Spanish, they just avoid this. In fact, translators of those novels, when they come up, when they have to render them into English, find them a little boring. They don't use enough verbs, and they'll stick in the waltzing and the dancing and so forth, just to make it sound more native in English. So people think in ways that their languages make it easy for them to express.
So how about these Germans that are always ending clauses with verbs, and so you just kind of have to wait on edge. I mean, does that affect? I mean, are they like in battle? They can't say shoot when you see the whites of their eyes. They have to say when you see the whites of their eyes, shoot. Does that mean that they get their shots off less quickly than other people?
Some people have thought that, and that's why, of course, people have said, well, the word order of thought is naturally, people have argued, the word order of French.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're asking, what are words worth? With linguist Geoff Nunberg, author of The Years of Talking Dangerously.
In our next segment, we'll consider the fact that many languages are dying, being abandoned, while a handful of languages, English, Chinese, Spanish, are being adopted by more and more people around the world. Good thing or bad thing?
We're coming to you from the Marsh Theater, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance. We'll take more questions from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
Words are like a certain person who can't say what they mean, don't mean what they say.
What are words really worth? Are all the words in all the languages and all the language the words are in worth preserving? I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor.
Our guest is linguist Geoff Nunberg, author of The Years of Talking Dangerously.
So, Geoff, I'm a big fan of biodiversity. I think if species start disappearing from the Earth will be a less healthy thing. I'm not so sure I'm a big fan of linguistic diversity because that makes for a kind of Tower of Babel. Right, less intercommunicability. Wouldn't the world be better if humans could just talk to each other? Take any human being from over here and any human being from over there, and they could just talk and understand. So would something be lost if there was a universal language driving out all local languages?
Sure. Languages are marks of cultural identity. They're vehicles of expression. Try to tell the French, well, just go over to English and you won't lose
I
anything.
wouldn't suggest that we do it by fiat and force,
Right.
but by evolution, coevolution.
The other point is important to realize. It's an idea that's appealing to Americans because Americans have this idea that basically one language is about as many as you can hold in your head at any one time. And the fact is that in most of the world, for most of history, most people have spoken a number of different languages, and that's still the way it is in most parts of the world. In India, in Asia, in Africa, people speak one language at home or around the hearth, another language maybe with their friends, and another language when they're communicating at the public level or writing or so forth. That was the way it was in medieval Europe. It's the way it is in the Arabic world. It's the way it is in India today. And it's a perfectly normal state of affairs. So we might have a universal language, English, say, for scientific communication and so forth. We're pretty close to that. But that doesn't mean that people have to give up the language in which they write poetry and love songs. That means has very different meaning to them.
Well, that's right. There's an old joke, It says, what do you call someone who knows 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who knows 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who only knows 1 language?
American.
But you like the idea of a universal language, but you don't think that has to compete with local languages. But if people live in a kind of multiply connected world, right? If you have the free flow of people and ideas, doesn't that put pressure on shareable languages?
It certainly does for 2 reasons. At this point, people, linguists estimate around 6,000 languages in the world, give or take. A huge proportion of those, maybe as many as a half, are endangered. Probably a quarter of them are moribund, which is to say there are no children speak them anymore. They're gone. Within a century, we'll probably go from 6,000 to 1,500 or 1,000. Now, that's still a lot of languages and includes a lot of very small languages by the standards of English or French. But I think it's important to try to hang on to those languages. And in fact, the new means of communication make that much easier. The time was that if you were an American, for example, you were the only person who could leave your country and still get news and television and radio and so forth via the Herald Tribune or local TV, CNN or something. Now, with the internet, if I'm a Catalan speaker, a Hungarian speaker, a speaker of Indonesian, I can get all that information wherever I am. So that it really flattens the levels the playing field, as we say, between the big languages and the small ones. And it's much easier for the small languages now to survive and continue to be used because of the internet.
You convinced me. I'm a fan of linguistic diversity, just as I am of biodiversity. We've got more questions from my live audience on this side of the room.
Good afternoon. My name is William. I'm not sure if this is a question for the linguist or for the philosophers, but what sort of problems does it solve or create to have the word myself be one word?
Well, so that's a good question. So we might say, well, what is a self? And a very pedestrian theory, which happens to be the one I think is right, is that self is just a role word. It's like my father, my mother, my mother is just an ordinary person who has a certain relationship to me, namely, she mothered me, right? Same with my father, same with my banker. And myself is just an ordinary person who happens to be identical with me. It's just a very important role we each play in our own life. But philosophers, and I suspect we have one here, confused philosophers have thought, no, there's got to be something deeper going on. There's got to be some self above and beyond or below the person. I think that's all baloney.
But go back to your mother example, and this is I'm going to ask Geoff because I don't know.
Are you going to bring my mother into it?
No. Why myself one word, but my mother or my father not one word? There's myself, yourself, is his self, right? But my mother, your mother, his mother, is there any significance to that? Is there anything deep to say about that?
I think the only deep thing to say is how superficial it is.
Right. Yeah, I think so too.
The fact is that if you think about myself, it looks like a possessive pronoun followed by this noun self, and that may be what's got all these philosophers hot and bothered about it. If you think about the third person, it's himself. and you're not inclined to make that analysis. In fact, self is just this suffix from Old English self, if you'll cast your mind back, that's used to mark a reflexive pronoun, which other languages do in other ways. In sich in German and me and te in French, it's just one way of marking a grammatical
So it's not a
category.
deep thing. So let's move on to the next question from this side of the room.
Yeah, we solved that philosophical problem for you.
Hi, I see a connection between
Who are you first?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Jerry. I see a connection between the increasing polarization in American society and anger and the ubiquity of all the demagogues spewing their particular type of language on cable TV and on talk radio. Empathy all of a sudden is a bad word. And during the immigration reform hearings, there was another word, I can't recall, there's a positive word, we're suddenly used in a negative way. I feel like their use of language is changing our society. Do words change society, or does society change the language?
I think cable TV sucks. It's a lesson we can gather from your insights there.
But Geoff, what do you think?
Well, I think it's certainly, I don't know that the language creates the differences, but it sure makes it possible to reinforce them and mark them. You have these two languages. If you look at the blogs, liberal and conservative, you have two different languages, not just in the way they talk about political doctrines and so on, even the way they insult one another. If you're on the right and you want to insult somebody on the left, you call them a moonbat. If you're on the left and you want to insult somebody on the right, you call them a wingnut.
But I have to say, I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna, although I probably will right now. I have to say, if you look over the broad sweep of American history and human history, gosh, there's a lot less invective between. I mean, people are lot less divided now than they used to be. Think of America. There's the Civil War. I mean, the whole thing came to blows. I don't know. So, if you track our language, like over the long sweep, is it coarser? Is there more? Are there more ways to insult people, or fewer, or what? I mean, over the
there
long
are different
sweep.
ways to insult people, but I think you're right that there's nothing people are saying about, say, Obama that they weren't saying about Franklin Roosevelt or about Abe Lincoln and so on. The difference is that now somebody's come up with a business model where you can sell this stuff 24/7, at any time of day, anywhere in America. You can turn on your radio or TV and hear nonstop invective, political invective, and it's a very profitable model for certain people.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking to Geoff Nunberg about what words are worth, and we've got more questions from our live audience.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark, and I'm very conflicted. So between words and language. So, for instance, the one that you brought up earlier about silences. Mm-hmm. Well, so that's replaced beepilepsy, I guess. Maybe the audience most of them aren't old enough to know, but that's the pause that people would have when their pager would go off. You'd be in the middle of a conversation.
Beepilepsy, I see.
And so beepilepsy was...
That's Old English.
Old English, yes.
You find it in Chaucer, I think. It's more Middle English.
I'm going to have to go get a cane. So my point is, the words often convey that individual idea, but the language conveys so much more. And how much are we losing between beepilepsy, which, for those who understood beepers, it was immediate what it was, but I'm afraid that I missed silences as to what the association between that and texting has to do with it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of interesting questions there. I mean, silences, I guess it's the CY, which refers to cyberspace. But what's amazing is words that continue when the associations are gone. I mean, we still dial the phone, even though my grandkids have no idea what a phone dial would be. Is there some deep lesson there from our linguist?
No, it's a process of words becoming more idiomatic and opaque. I still refer to the icebox. When my daughter was a little girl, I'd say it's in the icebox. And she'd say, no, it isn't. I looked down there, and it's in the other part of the refrigerator. She thought it meant the freezer, which makes perfect sense, but was wrong.
So words can hang around, even though their meaning gets gradually warped. So, like, dial-up doesn't mean a rotary thing. It means enter the phone number in whatever way you do that, right? I mean, so...
Or type doesn't mean type.
Right. So that's another phenomenon. That's another phenomenon, right? Do people resist the disappearance of words as much as they resist the disappearance of meetings?
Sometimes.
Geoff, on that succinct note, I'm going to thank you for joining us. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks so much.
Our guest has been Geoff Nunberg, professor of linguistics at UC Berkeley School of Information, a regular contributor to NPR and the New York Times, author most recently of The Years of Talking Dangerously.
We also want to thank everyone in our live audience for participating in the program. Let's give you and yourselves a round of applause.
So, John, you have any final thoughts? What's your final bit of wisdom here?
Well, I always, the questions people ask or the comments I make always stay in my mind, and I think of more to say after they're gone. So I do think philosophy is the most important discipline.
You couldn't have thought that on the spot?
No. Well, I mean, I couldn't have thought of a good reason, but I mean, it's because we frame the questions, and the other disciplines answer them. But where would they be if we weren't there to frame the questions, like what is there and what does it all mean? And the second one, I remembered how Peirce's distinction goes. I think an index is something that stands for something else because of spatiotemporal proximity. An icon is something that resembles it, and a symbol, there's a conventional meaning. So there's a distinction we don't want to lose.
There's a distinction we don't want to lose. Hey, look, my final thought is that I really think Geoff made an important point, right? So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is if you don't have the word, you can't have the concept. That doesn't seem right, but having the word, even if you still have the concept, can be really socially significant. It kind of compiles what otherwise would take a complicated description into something chunkable and repeatable, and and I think that's a really cool thing. I mean, I think that's a cool insight that you can have something like this linguistic relativism, but without going all the way to unthinkable thoughts, but not easily thinkable thoughts or not significantly thinkable thoughts. So I think that's a cool thought, and I think our conversation will continue, as always, on our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org, where our motto is cogito ergo blogo. I think, therefore I blog.
Another good point Geoff made is that the nice thing about words is you can express thoughts you yourself don't understand, and you made it too with quarks. So, for example, although I'm only vaguely aware of what a podcast is, I can tell our audience that you can download podcasts of our program from our website as well. Now, for the final word, we turn to a man who knows that the real value of words is how fast you say them. Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. Crowdsourcing, Twitter, Google as a verb, truthiness, and my new favorite, which just showed up in urbandictionary.com, the phrase hiking in Appalachia as a euphemism for adultery. America especially is taken with the coining of new words, repurposing of old words, mashing words together, creating acronyms. When it comes to jargon, slang, and doublespeak, America's got game, as they say. But why? Why is our language constantly changing? Well, it might go back to the American Revolution. We had just won a great war against England. This led to a problem. English was the language of the enemy. At the same time, it was the language most Americans spoke. Noah Webster wrote in 1789, quote, "Britain is at too great a distance to be our model and to instruct us in the principles of our own tongue. The taste of her writers is already corrupted and her language already on the decline," unquote. This, and opinions like it, set a tone. All right, we'll speak English, but England, you're not the boss of us. Which may be why, in Noah Webster's dictionary, the first American dictionary, we lost the U in honor, and why center is spelled ER and not RE, and why American language has become more or less an unregulated marketplace. Uber-American Thomas Jefferson was an enthusiastic coiner of words. He gave us, among other words, Anglophobia, electioneering, indecipherable, and authentication. And he wasn't the only president to jump into the making up of or rediscovery of words. Take bloviate. Warren G. Harding didn't make it up, but he found it and used it to describe his own oratorical style. Good thing he had a sense of humor about it. Bloviate disappeared for a while, but has recently reappeared thanks to Bill O'Reilly, who also uses the word to describe his own oratorical style, but I'm not entirely sure if he has a sense of humor about it. And there's Teddy Roosevelt. He was the first to use the word lunatic fringe. Unlike more recent usage, which refers to people who say that lizard men from the moon killed President Kennedy, Roosevelt first used the term to refer to the famous 1913 Armory Show art exhibit, which included Marcel Duchamp's nude descending a staircase, specifically the lunatic fringe of cubists and futurists. Teddy Roosevelt also gave us the term bully pulpit. Today it's taken to mean a platform from which one can bloviate without fear of contradiction. TR meant something slightly different from that. He famously used bully to mean great, terrific, brilliant, excellent, or fabulous. So for Teddy, the bully pulpit was a great place from which to advocate an idea, not a so-so place to cow people into submission. So language has a trickle-down effect in America. The words don't always end up where the originators want them to. There was President Clinton, for instance. I don't believe he coined any words himself, and he was asked by grand jury Ray Monica Lewinsky, is there a relationship? He replied, it depends on what the meaning of the word is. So there you have it. We all know what bloviate means and authenticate, but when it comes to is, we haven't got a clue. And that is America to me. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2009.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Special thanks to Stephanie Weissman, Patty Meyer, Arnie Warshaw, and Kedar Lawrence. Also thanks to Isaac Weiser, Rena Palta, Merle Kessler, Jennifer Jensen, and Corey Goldman.
Our production coordinator is Devin Strolovich. Daniel Elstein and Cole Leahy are our directors of research. Leo Weiss is our webmaster.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Stanford Humanities Center, various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk,
and from the members of KALW Local Public Radio, San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.